morning, everybody. Welcome to a regular Bellevue City Council meeting for April 19th, 2021. Tonight, Councilmember Stokes has asked us to excuse his absence, so we can start with a motion to do that, please.
I move to excuse Councilmember Stokes' absence from this evening's meeting.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you. Clerk, can you do the roll call, please?
Yes, please. Mayor Robinson?
Here.
Deputy Mayor Neuenhouse?
Here.
Councilmember Barksdale?
Here.
Councilmember Lee?
Here.
Councilmember Robertson?
I'm here.
As we just heard, Councilmember Stokes is excused from absence or from participation this evening. And Councilmember Zahn?
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Robertson, would you please lead us in the flag salute?
Thank you. Please join me in the flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic
which it stands,
one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. All right, we have two proclamations tonight. We have Hope Link Day proclamation, which will be read by Councilmember Robertson, and a National Volunteer Week proclamation that will be read by Councilmember Zahn. Councilmember Robertson, would you start us off, please?
Thank you. Whereas HopeLink began in Bothell, Washington in April 1971, when a group of laid-off workers responded to a devastating economic downturn by banding together to help their neighbors find jobs. And whereas in October of 1971, the group received a grant, took on the name North Shore Multi-Service Center, moved to Woodinville, opened a food bank, and also began offering rides. And whereas in 1984, by 1984, the organization had expanded to cover most of East King County, opening centers in Kirkland, Snoqualmie Valley, Bellevue, and Redmond to provide food and other emergency assistance, while also opening the first emergency shelter in North and East King County. And whereas in 1990, HopeLink became the first Medicaid transportation brokerage serving King County, and within 3 years had expanded to serve more than 25,000 people every year. And whereas the organization officially took on the name HopeLink in 2000, and whereas HopeLink expanded in North King County in 2006, opening its first emergency services center in Shoreline. And whereas HopeLink's first transportation hub opened in Kent in 2010, and 7 years later grew into a new and expanded facility in the same city. And whereas HopeLink currently serves 65,000 people every year, providing a network of services through 9 programs that help families, children, seniors, and people with disabilities gain stability, and when possible, exit poverty, as well as directs transportation services in King and Snohomish counties. And whereas HopeLink's vision of a community free of poverty includes a commitment to addressing systemic racism and the inequities and circumstances that drive poverty. And whereas for 50 years, HopeLink has served as not only a vital resource in our community, but a beacon of hope for our neighbors who are experiencing poverty and homelessness. Now, therefore, on behalf of the mayor of the city of Bellevue and mayors of Bothell, Carnation, Duval, Issaquah, Kenmore, Kirkland, North Bend, Redmond, Renton, Sammamish, Seattle, and Shoreline, jointly proclaim April 21st, 2021 as HopeLink Day and invite the community to celebrate the organization we are proud to call our own as it continues its essential mission of helping people and changing lives for the better in our community.
Thank you. Councilmember Zahn.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And speaking of helping people, whereas National Volunteer Week is an opportunity to celebrate the impact of volunteer service in our community, and whereas Bellevue residents support our neighbors in many ways through meaningful services that help people and the environment, and whereas during the pandemic, people reached out in myriad ways to help ensure that all Bellevue residents had a high quality of life, and whereas volunteers gave their talents and energy to make Bellevue the place you want to be, and whereas volunteers are recognized as an important partners with the city of Bellevue in providing services to residents. And whereas the city offers dozens of opportunities to volunteer in multiple departments, including parks and community services, police, fire, utilities, and community development. And whereas the city of Bellevue appreciates its volunteers and encourages residents to get involved in their community, neighborhood, and local government. Now, therefore, I, on behalf of Lynn Robinson, Mayor of Bellevue, Washington, and on behalf of its City Council, do hereby proclaim April 18th to 24th as National Volunteer Week, and urge all residents to recognize the valuable contributions made by volunteers and encourage others to serve the community to enrich the connections and fabric of Bellevue.
Thank you. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
I move to approve the agenda.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Clerk, do we have some people who would like to do oral communications tonight?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. There are 5 pre-registered speakers, although 4 of those are on the same topic on the same side, so we will only be able to hear from the first 3. So with that, I'll start with our first speaker, who is Randall Apted. Mr. Apted, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Great, thank you. Your time begins now.
Great, thank you. And thank you all for your time tonight. My name is Randall Apted. I am the president of the Bellevue Youth Theater Foundation, which is a group of friends, families, and volunteers who came together to help support the Bellevue Youth Theater, which is an amazing showpiece for the city of Bellevue. I wanted to come tonight just to get you a little bit of an update, to let you know that BYT, the Bellevue Youth Theater, had their first successful day camp over the spring break period for Bellevue School District. It was our first in-person programming since March of last year, and it ended with a successful streaming of a performance online for parents, friends, and family to see. We also wanted to let you know that after having long discussions with the theater staff and leadership, that streaming seems to be our immediate future. So as we go into our summer programming and hopefully fall programming after that, we were looking for a good way to be able to stream our presentations to help support social distancing. So on behalf of the foundation, we donated a little over $6,700 to the Bellevue Youth Theater to buy new streaming equipment to increase the quality of streamed productions so that we can move into the future and help support the Bellevue Youth Theater. Our next production will be this May. It will be a radio play done online with staff-led students and participants. So we will be trying to send out invitations for all of you to attend that. But we just wanted to take a moment to tell you about the Mad Hatter's Tea Party, which is the show we will be doing, and to let you know that the Bellevue Youth Theater Foundation remains committed to supporting this incredible program. I also wanted to take just a moment to say thank you on behalf of all of the staff, the volunteers, the friends, and family of the theater for your continued support of our program. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Apted. The next speaker on our list this evening is Patience Malaba. And Ms. Malaba, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. Your time begins here shortly.
Thank you. Good evening, council members. Thank you for this opportunity. For the record, my name is Patience Malaba, and I work for the Housing Development Consortium of Seattle-King County. Our association of 190 member organizations works each day to strive toward our vision that all people live with dignity in safe, healthy, and affordable homes within communities of opportunity. I want to express my gratitude to you and staff for all the hard work that you've done to help make the MFTE program an effective tool in your toolbox. while much opportunity remains for you to ensure a Bellevue truly for everyone. We fully support the intent of the program and encourage you to prioritize affordability as you consider parking costs and needs for MFTE residents. We urge your full support of a proposal that we've offered alongside members of the East Side Housing Roundtable as a coalition that includes, number one, to cap the MFTE rent increases on existing tenants to 3% per year. This will promote greater affordability for renters. As you well know, the King County AMI increased 6% between 2017 and 2018. This created hardship on existing affordable renters. As noted in the data that was analyzed by ARCH of the incentive units residents, the vast majority of them were paying more than 30% of income towards rent, which is largely due to AMI escalation. So capping MFTE rent increases will ensure that rent can never exceed the AMI threshold. At the time, it can only be lower. Secondly, we also strongly urge you to consider the impact of parking costs on the people residing in MFTE units. We urge your strong support of the East Side Roundtable proposal to partially cover parking costs for tenants in income-restricted units with a 30% parking discount. This, of course, would center the needs of moderate income people by ensuring that we are reducing cost on site for them. As you see through your discussion today, we fully understand that change is hard. We fear it and we fight it, but you are leading us through it all. King County alone faced a shortfall of 156,000 affordable homes in 2017, and that was before the COVID-19 pandemic that has exacerbated the crisis. Every city will need to do its part, and you will now show the rest of the cities in King County that you are stepping up. I commend you today for your courage, for your perseverance, and most of all, for your leadership. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Malaba. The next speaker on our list is Mallory Vanabama. And Ms. Vanabama, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Hold 1 second while I reset the timer. Okay, your time begins now.
Thank you so much. So good evening, Mayor Robinson, Deputy Mayor Neuenhuis, and Bellevue Council members. My comments largely echo what Ms. Malaba just shared with you. I'm Mallory Vanabama, Policy and Advocacy Manager with HDC, the Housing Development Consortium. We're a nonprofit membership association, and we're comprised of members who design, develop, own, and operate affordable housing in King County, including within the city of Bellevue. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to the MFTE program update on your study agenda this evening. As you well know, MFTE can be a highly effective housing production tool when properly calibrated, and we concur with others who've noted that participation is a critical measurement of the program's effectiveness. We recognize that more housing supply is needed in each income range regionally and see MFTE as an important means to generate moderately affordable units within market rate developments. As you consider proposed updates to the program, we offer these recommendations. Number one, support a transportation allowance equaling a 30% discount on parking spaces for MFTE unit renters. And secondly, cap MFTE rent increases at 3% a year to address the number of renters who experience cost burden after securing their homes. HDC submitted written comments with additional details for your review, and we want to thank you so much for taking another look at this program and for your service to the Bellevue community. Thanks.
Thank you. And our next speaker this evening is Pearl Leone. Here we go. Ms. Leone, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Great, thank you. Your time begins now.
Okay, good evening, Mayor Robinson and council members. I'm Pearl Lang with Amazon, and I'm pleased to offer support for emerging consensus between the Eastside Housing Roundtable members that Patience and Mallory just mentioned, including leaders in the private sector and nonprofit housing builders and supporters on how to best update the City of Bellevue's multifamily tax exemption program. This dialogue may not have come together had it not been for the mayor's encouragement of all of us to bring our ideas to the table and continue to work on new ideas. So on behalf of the entire business community, we thank you, the council and staff, for your efforts to create policies that support the growth of affordable housing in Bellevue. Tonight, I'd like to offer a few points for you to consider during your study session. First is about the 80% AMI. We appreciate broad support for an 80% AMI standard for MFTE in all urban land use district. This is the single most important step to turn MFTE into a tool that will be utilized to generate affordable units for working families. Second, on alternative to 2-bedroom unit options, thanks for considering alternatives that will allow builders to go below a minimum of 15% 2-bedroom units in return for deeper affordability or a greater number of affordable units. Third, on layered and stacked incentives. We propose increasing the AMI for layered incentives from 50% AMI to 65% AMI. While these scenarios may vary from site to site, our objective is to increase the number of affordable units included in each project, which is unlikely to occur at 50% AMI. On rent stabilization and the cost burden reduction, we're all concerned about the increased cost of housing, especially for those households whose income does not keep up with rent. And so that's why we support as well a cap on MFTE rent increases on existing tenants to 3% per year, while allowing higher AMI for new tenants. And finally, the last point on parking, everybody's favorite topic. For MFTE renters outside of downtown Bellevue, we agreed to a 30% discount for those who choose to rent a stall. Parking would be made available on a first come, first served basis. In downtown, however, no discount would be provided as we hope to incentivize transit ridership. We believe these principles can form the basis for unlocking the potential of the marketplace to generate more affordable units with a set of incentives that will actually yield results. So thanks again to council and staff alike for your collaboration.
Thank you, Ms. Lowe. And that is the end of our pre-registered list. The final speaker that had registered is on the same topic for the same side in support. So at this point, I would ask, is there anyone else connected to this call who would like to make oral communication to the council this evening? If so, use the raise hand function or *9 if you're connected with a phone. And Ms. Dean, I see your hand. Can you hear me?
I can, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. Your time begins now.
Great, thanks. Good evening, Mayor and council members. This is Heidi Dean. I was not planning to speak tonight, and the only reason I am is my husband handed me something literally 5 minutes before the meeting started. And what he handed me was a letter to us from Design Built Homes, which is a luxury home builder that is looking to buy homes in neighborhoods like mine, knock them down, and build ginormous McMansions. This is one of several home builders that are doing this in neighborhoods around the city. It's become a hot topic on Nextdoor. And we know that there are neighborhoods such as Newport Hills, Lake Hills, Eastgate, Spirit Ridge, Robbinswood, that are more affordable in the city that these developers are targeting. As a matter of fact, one representative from MN Custom Homes told an Eastgate resident that they had plans to basically do this to all of Eastgate. They've already got a foothold. They've already done it to 15 homes. In my neighborhood, just in a 2-block radius, I have 3 MN Custom Homes that are going up where previously affordable homes had stood. I'm concerned because as we talk about the affordable housing strategy and maintaining the stock of affordable housing, it's being wiped out. These were homes that could have gone to people that were first-time home buyers or empty nesters. I have a friend who was an empty nester and couldn't downsize in Bellevue, had to move away because they could no longer afford a smaller home here. What really bothers me and many others is the fact that the neighborhoods are being asked to do our part to provide affordable housing for the city and being asked to densify ourselves through additional ADUs and the DADUs with no restrictions on them. But yet these housing developers are coming in and buying up and destroying affordable housing units, are relative for other people. And what can we do about that? I understand that there's free market and capitalism and that sort of thing, but it just doesn't seem right that this can happen in our city, and that the neighborhoods are supposed to make up for it while these developers profit from this. So I just wanted to make you aware. My husband gets these letters and he gets phone calls and texts all the time. And they've actually started texting and calling my 18-year-old son. One developer in particular is convinced that my son owns our home and won't leave him alone. So please be aware and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Dean. And Mayor, at this point, there are no further hands raised. Mayor, yeah, I believe you're on mute.
I'm sorry, thank you. We're going to move on to our study session items. We have 2 items to discuss tonight. Mr. Miyake, would you like to introduce the first one?
So Mayor, I believe we're to the report of the city manager.
I think I skipped a page. I'm so sorry.
There are 2 items for study session, and we'll get to those.
All right, thank you. Yes, I totally skipped a page. Go ahead.
No worries. So good evening, Mayor Robinson and council members. We have 2 items under the city manager's report this evening. The first topic is an overview of the Bellevue School District's return to school efforts and plans for the fall, as well as an update on the budget and fall enrollment numbers. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Ivan Duran, the Bellevue School Superintendent, to provide us with the update. With that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Duran.
Wonderful, thank you all. Let me just do a quick clear, make sure everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, very good. Well, thank you, Mayor Robinson and council members, for this opportunity to be able to give you a brief update. I had an old Zoom link that dated back to last year of May 2020, and so that's when I gave you an update when we were a couple months in the pandemic, and it's literally been well over a year now. And so just really want to give you guys some background. But I first just want to really give some thanks and gratitude to Mayor Robinson for joining us on the governor's visits to Phantom Lake Elementary School. I sent a picture to staff because there was a photo and we're in the background talking to Dow Constantine, and there's a photo that's been circulated, in the New York Times and used for numerous stories. So it was really nice to get some press out of that. But I appreciate you taking the time on that visit, as the governor was, working and pushing to get educators vaccinated sooner, and also to really encourage a reopening of schools. I also want to thank City Council for your overall support for the Superintendent Advisory Council. I'll be sharing more information about that later, in the group that's been, really helping us to think about some of our budget decisions. And sorry to hear that Councilmember Stokes is not here, because I wanted to thank him for actually participating on the Superintendent's Advisory Council, which has been a group that was brought together to really help us think about some budget in alignment with our strategic plan where we want to be moving forward. So I'll share more about that. But tonight I just want to give you a brief update on just our reopening plan, some of the things we're thinking about for fall, a little bit on budget and enrollment updates, and then just briefly touch on that superintendent's report, because there are some really good nuggets in there we're going to be thinking about. So, we have been working really hard to have our students, who select in-person learning to be back in our schools. And prior to spring break, we have been serving our K-2 students and our 3 through 5, our 5th grade students, in half days. And right before spring break, we were also able to have our secondary students back for 2 days a week, part-time before spring break. And we look forward to having them all back next week. This week for us after spring break was a quarantine week that we had bargained with our association, so we needed to honor that agreement. And so we look forward to having our students back, who have chosen to receive in-person services next week. And we're going to be really working hard so we can provide more in-person services for our students. We are currently following the 6-foot guidelines right now, and we're working closely with our Education Association and the other 9 bargaining groups that we have to work with to really maximize, the space that we have and to do all that we can so that we can serve more students and increase the time that, they receive some of their educational services. So really, I think that's important. I really just want to say that I am deeply concerned about the mental health and well-being of our students, and I believe having them back in person will serve them best at this time. We are also really working closely to support our students who have not fared as well in the remote learning, and we're going to have a lot of work to catch some students up, and we'll do everything we can. But up to this point, it has been wonderful to have our students, back in our schools. Our educators have, done a phenomenal job over this last year, and now, we're having to adjust and make some changes as we have students in. But we have numerous risk mitigation strategies are in place. We have had some cases in schools, but we have not had any spread in our schools. So we know that the risk mitigation strategies have been working. I do want to share that we are also working to have and planning on a full return in the fall, knowing that more people are going to be vaccinated, and we'll still follow all the health and safety protocols that are in place at that time. But we'll be having the 3-foot guidance in place then, and so we're really looking to how we can ensure that we have our students back and get back to as close to normal as we can. 16-year-olds are now eligible for the vaccine, so that's going to just help if we have more people who can get vaccinated. Just another layer of mitigation strategies that will really support our reopening plans. We are also working to have some type of virtual option for some of our 9th grade through 12th grade students. We haven't worked out exactly what that's going to look like, but we know that we'll probably have some type of package curriculum, and some of our educators are actually supporting our students in that way. But we know that there are some students that really may need to have that option. So we'll be finalizing some of that work over the next couple of weeks and make that announcement, because we have staffing and courses and all kinds of things that we need to get ready for the fall. And then I think it's just so important to say that, all of us, I think as a community, I think we've done a pretty amazing job over this last year, but we're not through this yet. We're still in a pandemic, and we all just need to pay close attention to all the safety numbers and the guidelines at this time. And I just cannot stress how important it is for everyone to still wear a mask, to follow physical distancing, wash your hands, and if appropriate, and meet your personal convictions, to get vaccinated. And all of these are layers of mitigating strategies that keep us all safe. And today I was a little concerned because our King County numbers are 199.4 for every 100,000 cases. And we're watching that along with hospital rates, because those are the two measures that we're keeping track of. And if both of those numbers, reach a certain elevation, we can end up going back in phase 2. And we definitely don't want to be going backwards. But if that does happen, what we currently have in place in our schools will be able to continue. But it's, again, just something we're all going to need to be watching. So that's kind of a brief update on where we are with our return, what we're thinking about for the fall. And I just really want to briefly just mention, some aspects around budget. I think you all are aware that, we've been receiving a lot of news and information around the federal government support and how they are working to provide different funds through what's called the ESSER program, which is the elementary schools emergency relief funds that they've set up for elementary schools and secondary schools. Almost all that money was allocated through Title I percent numbers. And so districts that have large numbers of free and reduced numbers in their school district will receive higher amounts of money, which I fully support, but the biggest challenge that we're dealing with right now is that this pandemic has impacted all of our students, from our students who receive special education services to our language, to our students who receive language services, to students who experience homelessness. It's not just an issue around poverty. And so, we have been really advocating closely with our legislators to try to provide additional state funding and supports for us, but I don't think that's going to happen at this time. And, to date, we've spent about $25 million on COVID-19. That ranges anything from supplies to staffing. We've spent a lot of our reserves to cover that amount. And again, we're grateful for the federal funds that are coming in. We're getting probably about $20 million, but they're designed to be one-time money. And, we, as I think about recovery and like how long it's going to take for us to really get through this and out of this, it's probably 3 to 5 years. And with the money that we receive from the federal government, we probably have enough for about 1 or 2 years worth of recovery work. So we're going to have to really be thinking creatively around our budget and uses of our funds and really consider about what else we need to do so that we can support our students in the best way possible. So we didn't get what we hoped from legislators as far as we know right now. And so I know our local delegation was really trying and advocating for us. And so I know next year there's a possibility already for a supplementary budget, and we will definitely be working with the city of Bellevue and our council members to help us in that advocation to try to get more funds, because we're definitely going to need it. And then I just briefly want to also mention that, our enrollment numbers have gone down. This year alone, we were down about 800 students. We are projecting to be down another 600 students next year. So that's a total of about 1,400. And there's multiple reasons, from just the high cost of housing, remote work, has really become, a really big thing now. And I don't know how many companies are going to go back full time. So I think, families have chosen to move to other places. And then, obviously we've had reduction of international work visa and, families that have chosen to move at this time. So we're watching those numbers closely because that's where our biggest source of revenues come from. And so really need to, pay close attention to that. And we're going to have to really think differently about our budget and think about how we can prioritize some of the work that we need to do to ensure our students have success and our educators are supported in the best way possible. And I briefly I sent this over to you all earlier, and hopefully you can get this in your packet, but this is just a brief report from our superintendent's community advisory group. And this was a group that we put together that represented, community members, business leaders, students, educators, a really wide range of people served on the committee. And we put it together earlier in the year just to help us think through, here's our strategic plan, here are our goals, here are the things that we want to do. What are some other ways that we can think about it? So there was just a lot of creativity and ideas that came from those conversations. And in this report that I sent to you, the committee basically made a recommendation of about $10 million of further investments in social emotional well-being and mental health support, which we all fully support and know that is really going to be even more important as students return. And so there's a couple ideas that have been already shared around what we can do in that areas. We were also thinking about adding additional academic supports, which could include providing tutors, including tutors for bilingual support for our students who need that level of support, academic interventionists, and then really thinking about other ways that we can provide extracurricular enrichment opportunities. And then finally, the other recommendation that came in that is really something we're going to be thinking about is how we can provide more resources to our family, which could even include an ombudsperson position in our district, support our families, especially our students who receive special education services, and really think about how we can better reach out to our families, connect with our families. And then the final part of the report was a little bit more bigger thinking that they shared for us around just what we can think about at a larger scale, which is going to take a lot more involvement from our community, from our city, from thinking about universal pre-K to thinking about how we can develop more global competency with our students, to think about how we can better increase the social emotional learning, how we can provide better professional development for our staff. And then really the big one that came out of there is really also thinking from an operations and well-being standpoint is around how can we restructure our middle schools to increase connection and relationships and social emotional learning. So we're really excited about some of those recommendations that came to us from this council, and we're going to really be taking them to heart. And again, looking at what we can do, knowing that we're going to have some obviously budget concerns that we have to do, but we look at our box of people, time, and money and think about how we maybe possibly need to reallocate some funding so we can meet some of these needs. But I think these are going to be so important for us, especially the mental health and well-being, as we have more students back and we start to see some of the impact that this pandemic has had on our students and our families. So just thank the mayor and the city council for this, and Mr. Miyake for having me as part of your update. Really appreciate this.
Thank you, Dr. Duran. Really appreciate all that you've done and do. And I'm not going to open up this to questions and comments, but we know we can reach out to you if we want to by email. So thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, next on our agenda.
Mayor, I
yes.
have one more item on the city manager's report, if you don't mind.
Sure.
And that is with regard to the Federal American Rescue Plan Act funding. This is the second topic I just alluded to under the city's manager's report. And this is just a very quick update on the rescue plan funding and what we know about it as of today. As many of you are aware, the city of Bellevue is slotted to receive $20.7 million. And here's what we know about that. The city will receive this amount over 2 years, and it will come in 2 installments, 10 million this year and around 10 million this year and 10 million in 2022. This coming May, we'll receive guidance from the federal government on how those funds can be spent, as well as how we might access additional federal funding. At this point, there are just many moving pieces right now, and we'll be back to the council once we know more. I just bring this up because there's been a lot of interest by the community as well as the council members on this. And again, we'll be back once we know more. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Is there anything else that I missed here?
Oh, I think that's it.
Okay, good. Okay, next we have the consent calendar. Is there a motion to approve the consent calendar?
I move to approve the consent calendar.
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. All right, next up we have a public hearing, and Councilmember Robertson, you wanted to recuse yourself. Would you like to speak to that?
Thank you. Yes, I would like, as we all do, many of us have day jobs, as we call them, and our spouses have jobs and businesses. My husband's business is does business with the proponent or the property owner in the next public hearing. I co-own his business, although I'm not active in it. And so in order to avoid a conflict of interest, I am recusing myself. I will be leaving the meeting, and then the clerk will let me know when I can log back in. So thank you.
All right, thank you. Mr. Miyake, would you like to introduce this?
Yes, Mayor. As you mentioned, that topic is a public hearing, and it's also subsequent action to relinquish a portion of its existing sewer easement as well as construction easement. Joining us this evening for a brief staff report is Ian McDaniel, the real property manager. Following the public hearing, we are seeking council direction to take action on a proposed resolution to release these easements. With that, I'll turn it over to Ira. Ira?
Thank you, Mr. Miyake, and good evening, Mayor and Council members. Our staff report tonight is regarding a request to release a portion of a sewer easement and the entirety of a construction easement located at 12855 Coal Creek Parkway Southeast. And as always, tonight's public hearing is to allow the public an opportunity to comment on this release. First up is just a vicinity map. This parcel lies just off of Southeast Coal Creek Parkway. And now we zoom in a little bit more on the parcel in question. So this property is being redeveloped, and the owner is relocating a part of their sewer line within their property. As a part of their permitting process, they asked the city to release the portion of the sewer easement that's shown here in gray. The new route for the sewer line will be covered by a new easement shown in purple. The owner will also be required to convey a new access easement to the city as shown in orange to facilitate access to the sewer easement that will remain along the south line of the property, which is in blue. And the new easements will be conveyed to the city prior to recording of the easement releases. The owner has also asked that we clear an old construction easement from their title, which is shown here in yellow. That easement was only intended for the initial construction of that line back in the 80s, but it didn't have a set expiration date, so we're basically just cleaning that up. Following the public hearing, staff requests council action on the proposed resolution authorizing the release of the easements. This ends our staff report, and we will be available following the public hearing for any questions you may have.
Okay, thank you, Ira. Is there a motion to open the public hearing?
I move to open the public hearing.
Okay.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Clerk, do we have anybody signed up for public comments on this?
Thank you, Mayor. There are no registered speakers, and we did not receive any written comments on this public hearing. So at this point, I would ask if there's anyone connected to the call who would like to make a comment during the public hearing, please use the raise hand function or *9 if you're connected with a phone. And I do see one hand. Miss Dean, can you hear me?
I can, thank you. I just had a question. So I know that this must be in relation to the Basil Newport Townhomes development down there on around the Coal Creek Basin. And I was just wondering how the new sewer easement and the utilities easements and rerouting those things, what impact will it have? Will it have any impact on Coal Creek in doing so? I know that Dan Murray, who lives down in the 125th hauler down there, he can't even add on a bathroom. He lives in a very small home. because of concerns with his location to Coal Creek, and these things will be even closer. So that was just what I was wondering. And I don't know if that will be covered in this or not. So thank you very much.
And we can get an answer to that during our discussion. Are there any other public comments? Clerk?
I do not see any additional raised hands. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, is there a motion to close the public hearing?
I move to close the public hearing.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, so I'm going to open this up for discussion. And I think all of us would like to hear the answer to the question that was asked in the public comments. But if you have a comment or question, council, please raise your hand. I can see you. I'm not seeing any. So Ira, could you answer that question that we got?
Yeah, I'll hand this off to Sean Wells, our Utility Development Review Manager. He's probably better equipped to answer this one.
Okay.
Hi, council members. Yeah, the sewer easement is being relocated. It's basically, Ira, perhaps you could pull up slide 6 and share that as an example. The sewer line comes down Factoria Boulevard and cuts through the property currently. The future alignment of the sewer is going to, where it crosses from Factoria Boulevard and crosses Coal Creek Parkway, it will then parallel Coal Creek Parkway. I don't remember the exact distance, but a slight distance down Coal Creek towards the southeast, where it then cuts back into the property and continues its alignment along the south property line. This proposed project doesn't change any of the sewer capacity issues that are in this area or any other area that the lady had mentioned. Does that answer your question?
It does for me. Council, any further questions or comments from the council? Not seeing any. Is there a motion to adopt resolution 9924?
I move to adopt resolution 9924, authorizing the execution of documents necessary to release a portion of an existing sewer easement and the entirety of a construction easement located at 12855 Coal Creek Parkway Southeast, which have been declared surplus to the city's needs and are no longer required for providing continued public utility service.
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, resolution passes. Thank you. All right, now we're on to our study session items. Mr. Miyake, would you like to introduce?
Yes, sure, Mayor. Good evening, Mayor and council members. We have two items, topics for the study session this evening. The first one is a development of the 21-22 Human Services Needs Update. This is actually an overview of the process itself. And just by way of background, the Human Services Needs Update is an actual biannual report that provides comprehensive data on human service needs of Bellevue residents, including highlights of the voices of our community members. The report is one of the primary sources of data used by the Human Services Commission to guide them in making funding recommendations to the council. Tonight, council is being asked to provide staff with any feedback on any additional elements they would like to see included in this report, which will be slotted, I believe, to come to council in January of 22. So joining us this evening are Tony Esparza, our Associate Director of our Parks and Community Services Department, as well as Christy Stanglin, Human Services Associate Planner, and Alex O'Reilly, Human Services Manager, all of them from the Parks and Community Services Department. With that, I'll turn it over to the staff.
Mr. Miyake. Good evening, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and council members. We are excited to be speaking with you this evening about the Human Services Needs Update. It is a key report, as City Manager Miyake mentioned, that guides our recommendation for the allocation of human services funds so that those decisions are data informed and equitable. It also guides the work of our staff. Your feedback is essential to ensure that we include your priorities as we gather this data from our residents and our providers and our constituents here in Bellevue. Ms. Christy Stangland, our Human Services Planner, will provide an overview of the needs update and the methodology that will be used to gather data. Ms. Stangland.
Great. Thank you very much, Tony.
Sorry, Christy, Mrs. Barza, can you please, oh, thank you. Thank you.
May I interrupt for just a moment? I'm wondering if Councilmember Robertson is back on board here or not.
Oh, good. Thank you.
There you are. Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Great. So the purpose of tonight is to ask Council for feedback on the development of the 2021-2022 Human Services Needs Update. I will be providing the background and the overview of the development of the Human Services Needs Update, and then I'll be asking for feedback from Council to ensure that Council priorities are included. I'll start by discussing the diagram of our 2-year funding cycle. The Human Services Fund provides funding for agencies in our community to provide direct services to the residents of the community. This chart shows that the Human Services Needs Update is a core element of the Human Services activity and describes where the report fits into the work of our department. You'll see identify needs. This occurs through the research completed in the Human Services Needs Update, which includes the residents, consumer, and the nonprofit providers' input through several approaches, as well as existing research and databases. I'll be speaking about this in detail later tonight. The request for proposal, our upcoming funding cycle will begin in March in early March when the application is released to the nonprofit agencies, and the application will be due in early April of 2022. The last application process, we received $7 million in request for the $4.1 million in funds that we had to allocate to over 100 applications. For funding recommendations, the Human Services Commission uses the data from the Human Services Needs Update to identify the needs and prioritize as they review the funding applications. So the data gathered in this report, in this needs update, will direct the Commission's funding recommendations for 2022. The Commission's focus on equity and prioritizing funding to historically underserved communities in their funding recommendations. For council action, the staff and the commission present the funding recommendations to the Human Services General Fund and the Community Development Block Grant to the council for approval. For the contract monitoring, and ongoing data collection, we complete performance-based contracts with funded agencies. The staff regularly monitor performance and outcome measures through regular quarterly reports and holding program reviews. So the Human Services staff are constantly gathering changing data, participating in community meetings, and working closely with our community agencies to ensure that we're aware of the changing needs in our community. For instance, the Human Services Division allocated close to $4 million additional since the beginning of the pandemic, which is outside our normal funding cycle. Due to the ongoing data collection, the Human Services staff and commission were able to identify the most critical needs in the community during the pandemic and make recommendations to direct these additional dollars to those needs. Ongoing data collection demonstrated that emergency financial assistance, low barrier shelters, food, mental health services, domestic violence services, child care, and legal services were the most critical needs, and the council approved allocated dollars to these needs. The Human Services General Fund is different. However, as these funds prioritize funding the entire safety net to fill the gaps in the human services support to ensure that the needs of the human services are available for the diverse needs of all our residents. The General Fund not only includes these critical service areas that we funded during the pandemic, but it also includes a broader continuum of services, such as youth programs, services for people with disabilities, employment programs, adult education, English language learning classes, the full continuum of housing, support programs, and physical health. This requires comprehensive and thorough data gathering to ensure that the broad array of human services needs are captured in the report, and to ensure that representative voices from residents and consumers include our community's diverse perspective, including the voice of immigrants, people of color, individuals with disabilities, and their caregivers, unhoused residents, and the LGBTQ community. The staff and the commission are also continually reviewing our practices to ensure that they are equitable and accessible. Based on council's recommendations, the Human Services staff made adjustments to our requirements to be able to support community-based agencies by simplifying our application and reducing barriers. Next slide, please. No, could you back it up one? Oh, there we go. Thank you, Tony. At previous council meetings, there have been questions asked about how we track the effectiveness of our services. Here are the list of ways that we're able to measure the effectiveness of our funds. Agencies submit quarterly reports, which include the following: documentation for funds spent on approved services. So I'll use behavioral health as an example for this slide. If personnel is the approved expense, they would send personnel backup documentation. They report on the unduplicated Bellevue residents that receive these services in the contracted year, and the service units, so such as hours of counseling provided, and then a narrative report, which can include client stories, successes, and/or challenges. For our year-end report, they include all of the items that were listed above and for the quarterly report. They also submitted outcome reports. An outcome for behavioral health may be improvement in mental health, such as decreased depression. And they submitted a demographics report. The staff work closely with agencies if they're not meeting quarterly service units. Staff also conduct agency site visits. All this information is reviewed by staff and the commission to ensure that our funding is reaching those most impacted by need. So Bellevue has been a leader in developing the Human Services Needs Update and has maintained a biennial report since 1989. The reason for this is simple. In order to represent the broad human services needs of all of our residents, we have found that it is critical to have accurate and comprehensive data that includes community voice from throughout the city. Human Services Commission and staff strongly believe that this is a report about people, about helping all Bellevue residents to reach their full potential and all be contributing members of an innovative, vibrant, and caring community. The Human Services Commission has provided input that has informed our presentation this evening, and the Commission will continue to provide input throughout the development of the needs update. The needs update is a combination of qualitative and quantitative data, an analysis of trends and issues, and a forecast of the changes in human services. As I mentioned earlier in my description about the funding cycle, the needs update is used to guide the funding process by identifying clients' needs and creating priorities. This is one of the primary sources used by the Human Services Commission to guide them in making funding recommendations to the council. As I previously noted, the Human Services staff also continually collect data to ensure that we are being responsive to the changing needs in the community and are aware of the critical needs as they arrive. In addition, it also guides the work of the Human Services Division staff and other groups that make good decisions relative to how they use these resources to ensure that Bellevue residents have the assistance they need to enjoy a high quality of life. Bellevue Human Services Needs Update provides important data for the entire community. It is used by providers, community groups, and those involved in regional planning. Listed here is a list of areas of focus in the Human Services Needs Update. The special focus area adjusts to the changing needs. The special focus area for this document will be COVID and its impact on human services. We are constantly looking for new and improved ways to clearly display data. In this year's report, we will be adding a section to each chapter to identify any possible disproportional impacts of human services needs to residents based on their race. The report will include data related to the intersectionality of race and each topic. For instance, intersectionality of race and homelessness. So we gather qualitative and quantitative data in a variety of ways for this report. Due to COVID, we will be adjusting some of our methods of gathering data to follow COVID guidelines and account for the fact that many of our providers are offering virtual services. A statistically valid phone and online survey will be conducted by Come Engage Research and will reach over 400 Bellevue residents asking questions about both household and community health and the human services needs. Both the phone and online survey will be available in Bellevue's top 6 languages. We will hold over 30 community conversations and key informant interviews, which include both providers, community leaders, and consumers. These will be held as virtual meetings and phone calls. We also conduct a consumer survey that provides important feedback from Bellevue's residents that use or need human services. Due to COVID, most of our providers are now providing service virtually. So we will be adjusting our approach to ensure that we get the important voice of our consumers and those with lived experience. We'll be working with nonprofit providers, community partners, and internal City of Bellevue programs to get the survey distributed as widely as possible. The survey will be distributed as a paper survey, a QR code, and an electronic link to provide various options for completion. These surveys will be available in Russian, Spanish, Korean, Vietnamese, simplified Chinese, and English. To ensure that the data that we are collecting is representative of all community voices, we will be prioritizing community conversations and consumer input from historically underserved communities, including those with disabilities, the LGBTQ community, the youth, those who are unhoused, and the BIPOC community. We administer an electronic survey to agencies that provide health and human services to Bellevue residents, including both that receive City of Bellevue funding and some that do not receive City of Bellevue funding, yet are accomplishing critical work in our community. We analyze the data from many sources, including the 1 year and 5 year estimate of the 2019 American Community Survey, the census data, and other reports and websites that pertain to Bellevue and East King County. Through this data gathered in the past, through data gathered in the past year, we've reached over 700 people. All of this data will be analyzed and summarized in a comprehensive report. We will be incorporating feedback from that Council has given us during our presentation on February 2020 for the findings of the Human Services Needs Update and our presentation on November of 2020 on the Human Services funding recommendations. Based on feedback, staff have prioritized including information in the following areas: immigrants and refugees, behavioral health, including youth mental health, suicide, and substance use disorder, homelessness and homelessness prevention, LGBTQ, and underrepresented groups, specifically the Latinx community. So here's an overview of our timeline. So we'll be collecting data through the summer of 2021. A draft report will be provided to our commission in November, and we'll be coming back to present our findings to Council in January of 2022. And then we'll distribute our report online in February of 2022.
Thank you so much, Christy. Council, we welcome your feedback and your input on how we can ensure that your priorities are included in our data collection efforts.
Great. Thank you so much for this presentation. Deputy Mayor, I am going to start with you because you are the liaison to the Human Services Commission. And then I'll look at all of you, and anybody who has a comment or question, just raise your hand, okay? Go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. So first off, great presentation, Tony and Christy. Certainly very robust, and I certainly think it covers the vast majority. This is not the first time to the rodeo here. You've been doing this for quite a number of years, so you certainly got it down packed. But I also see little things here that we continue to improve. And that's really, really good to see, to get that full data and get that full scope, that full understanding of the needs in our community right now. So just very proud of the work that staff's doing on this, and it really will help us set those priorities for funding for 2022. So 2 quick questions for you. One, have we historically ever checked with our public safety folks, fire, our CARES team program, or police in terms of what they're seeing in terms of any trends in the community as well? Because certainly you're speaking to all the wonderful providers in our city and community members, but are you checking in with them as well as part of this overall needs update?
Yes, sir. Excellent point, and that most definitely does occur. And while I might answer your question, we also have Ms. O'Reilly, our Human Services Manager, on the phone, and of course, Ms. Stingland, who can jump in as well. But that has historically been included, both input from our public safety departments and also other departments in the city.
Fantastic. And then how often are we checking in? Because 2022 seems in some ways during this pandemic quite a ways away, and certainly could get much better, hopefully, as we continue to vaccinate, but it could also get worse due to these variants. So how often are we checking back in as we're progressing through this and collecting this data? What do we have in place to pivot or be nimble in order to make sure that as soon as we hit 2022, we have a really good understanding and current understanding of the biggest needs in our community?
Yeah, excellent point. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So I think reflectively looking back, we faced this challenge from the very beginning of the pandemic. Luckily, our human services team has always remained dedicated to getting ongoing data collection even prior to the pandemic and not having it become static in this report. So they already had practices in place that allowed for that. We've continued that throughout the pandemic and will continue that throughout this data gathering effort. Even when we extended our application process earlier in the year of 2020, we went back to the providers a second time to get an update from them. So they submitted their applications and then we went back out and asked for them for an update on the impacts from the pandemic. Other methods that our staff use to continue to bring in updated and current data are through presentations to our commission, as you know, Deputy Mayor, so that we are hearing ongoing and current presentations of the needs. We've recently had presentations from our probation division, from police, from the prosecutor's office, and from the defense office, so that we could hear the needs that they are seeing firsthand in the community. In addition, our human services staff participate in a variety of regional meetings that help them stay informed, both from a provider's perspective, but also from a resident's perspective. And of course, staying in touch with those that are providing frontline services, including those you mentioned, and our wraparound coordinators who serve in Bellevue Public Schools. It helps us get the perspective of what's happening live in our community to include in our decision-making.
Terrific. Thank you, Tony. Again, thanks, Christy, and thank you, Alex.
Okay. Who else? I see Councilmember Barksdale and Councilmember Lee and Councilmember Zahn. Go ahead, Councilmember Barksdale.
Awesome. I just really wanted to say thanks to Tony and staff for the holistic approach and looking at the intersectionality of race relative to the other demographic characteristics. And then there was one question I did have in terms of some of the changes that we're making, which I appreciate. Is there a way that we could sort of get a feedback loop on those to see were we actually able to achieve the goals that we were trying to, as we, based on the changes that we made for this year?
Yes, absolutely. So Councilmember Barksdale, if I'm hearing you correctly, I think you're referencing the new added data that we'll be collecting around the intersection of race and actually the impacts of COVID as well. So those are the two specific items we called out as shifts in the report. Ways that we will be able to be responsive to that data moving forward, specifically the intersection with race, will be through our demographic data collection in our reports and making sure that we are reaching those that the intersectionality identifies as being most disproportionately impacted.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nice chat.
Councilmember Lee.
Yes, I always respect and the good work you've done on this Human Service Needs Assessment Report. It's an excellent documentation of what's happening, and a lot of people look at it, as a real great reference. Keeping up with what's going on, because we need to be responsive to current needs, right? And I think I just want to do two things. One is in a big, broad picture, and then I have some questions specifically to a couple of things that you mentioned. The big thing I'm interested in is I've always been thinking about building capacity. I mean, we got all kinds of needs, and we cannot meet all the needs. If we're lucky, we can meet half. 50% of the needs, even less, because many people don't even apply because they know it's not on the horizon. So, whatever we do, give us a real good sense, but, doesn't make sense to go to the finite 10%. Doesn't matter. Perfection is actually, the friends of failure, whatever. Okay, so I want to know, when we do most of the funding through human services, you do great. The Human Service Commission do a good job, excellent work. They always been done under traditional, financing models. Grant, we got them, like CBG. They require this, they require this. So oftentimes, I think the council's been talking about it during the COVID because we have some non-traditional money that's available, like city manager is talking about. I hope this ARP funding, some of them give us more latitude. So I really want to build capacity of people who are in need, but who are not traditionally capable of setting up because at the beginning, they're new. They don't qualify for a lot of funding mechanisms. And so I want to see how we can focus on that with your new program moving forward. Unless you tell us there's no need for it through your needs assessment, but I believe there is. Okay, so I'm going to want you to focus on it and be able to, and you have done well. You have responded to us. We really appreciate it. All the city money that's been put on the COVID-19 has been able to accomplish some of that goal. So I really want to encourage you. Okay, that's the good thing. So I want to know, to build this capacity, how are you being responsive? How to be responsive to that need? You don't have to tell me now, okay? It might be complicated because I'm sure we're all limited with time, but I want you to focus on that, maybe come back to us. How are you responsive to that particular building capacity needs, okay? One. Then go down to more specific things you talk about. You mentioned about COVID-19, because this was happened last year. So we are working very hard, and that data is showing up, right? It shows up in your data, lots of need in that. So we're planning to do other stuff. I think it's good, we have to do it. But I just want to be sure that COVID-19 doesn't distort your long-term assessment, long-term need. Because yeah, it could be, it could be all gone in hopefully, crossing our fingers, we get back to normal. The 2 years from now, we get back to normal. So I don't want you to be distorting your data, okay? So I want to just put that in your mind. I hope you are thinking about that. And so anyway, tell me also later, okay? If you don't have time. If you do, if Mayor allows you to do that, answer. Second question is, you mentioned something about languages you're going to use. I noticed that you are just talking, including simplified Chinese. So what happened to the traditional Chinese? That's the question I want to know now. Yeah.
Yes, that's an excellent question, Councilmember Lee.
I hope it's a good answer. If it's not good, I'll be very disappointed.
Ms. Stingland, do you have any insight into that?
So is what I was going to be translating it into is the top languages that are recommended by our diversity staff for City of Bellevue. So it's the languages that are translated currently on our website. We're definitely open to other languages. We have not started translation for any of them. So I think that we can look at
the traditional Chinese has always been included in all the Chinese.
Okay.
So I'm just curious, why did you remove it?
I didn't remove it. I had went on to our website and looked at and then talked to diversity, and I think it was just an overlook. So I will add that too. Thank you very much, Councilmember Lee.
Thank you.
I would just like to add that the simplified Chinese was selected for the translation of our online and phone survey. So that was the written part of the translation that was available for the in the company that we are using to do our translation services for the phone and online survey. But for there is a possibility, as Christy said, to use additional languages or types of Chinese.
I'm surprised because I've always, in all the Chinese language I've seen, the city has been doing has included both simplified and the traditional Chinese, written Chinese. Unless you change that, unless you change to a new translator or something, or you decided not to, I would like to know why, what justified the use. If you, that written language is the more important way people read, and that is different. And it's always been used for Chinese.
Excellent feedback, Councilmember Lee. Thanks for helping us catch that oversight.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Zahn.
Yes, thank you. I so appreciate all the work that you do with the needs assessment. You know, my sense is that it is a report about people that is used regionally. And I especially appreciate the fact that we collect both qualitative and quantitative data, because I think sometimes we think that only quantitative matters, but the stories and the information also matters to help us better understand, because there may be communities where the qualitative is actually more meaningful. And if we don't collect that part, we're missing part of that data. And getting the disparity around race and intersectionality, thank you for that. I think that's also important, because certainly what we saw during the pandemic was the health outcomes and who was getting COVID was very much related to some of the disparities we were seeing around many other items. So I really like that. Appreciate the fact that we're going to continue to have the simplified application process. I think that's what I heard. So appreciate that as well. Couple of questions that I have. One is, as we have been in COVID now for over a year, are you finding new partners, new community-based organizations that we have now partnered with in collaboration? And I'd like to understand a bit more about where some of those areas might be. And then the second one is, you know, Dr. Duran talked about the school district and the fact that they really only have recovery funding for 1 to 2 years, when in reality, he's seeing 5 to 10 years before they really emerge fully. So are there some needs from the families and the students that may be even more exacerbated now as we recover from COVID, and how we might tease out some of those needs? The other one is that I don't know if we normally would have small business and recovery and support as part of the human services needs, but I definitely am concerned about all of the small businesses that we're losing in Bellevue, and whether that is an aspect of human services or if it's completely different and there's no crossover there. And then lastly, I was also thinking about the number of dollars that we might be allocating towards human services. So certainly with the $20.7 million we're getting from the rescue plan, how we might sort out how much money we should allocate towards human services for the next couple of years to hopefully prevent people from being evicted, and mental health. And I think we're very concerned also about people's emotional health and all of that. Thank you.
Absolutely. Excellent questions, Councilmember Zahn. Thank you. Let me see if I can touch base on a few of them for you. So your first was around, have we developed new partnerships during the pandemic? And through the council's multiple decisions to disperse funds into the community via CDBG, CV, and its various forms that has come through, also via some general funds that were allocated in CARES Act funding, we have indeed been able to fund some new partners, and specifically, I can name 2 and get you additional information if you would like, but 2 that you just recently approved funding to go to was Centro Cultural Mexicano, and that was for rent assistance, and we have not previously funded them for services, and so that is a new partnership. In addition, we in years past have partnered and funded the YMCA, but we have not in the very most recent years received applications for funding from them, and they came back through in the time of the pandemic and requested some funding for both rent assistance and food assistance, and so we re-engaged them as a partner as well. So those are 2 agencies that were provided funding via pandemic dollars that we otherwise were not providing funding to via our Human Services Fund. Your questions around the district, absolutely. You know, the council has made the wise decision and supported having as having our wraparound coordinators in the district, and you all heard from them a couple of months ago when they came to report on their great work, and they are able to provide us frontline insight into the needs of families. And in fact, they came along with the McKinney-Vento coordinator from the district and the early learning director from the district to speak to our commission, to inform the commission of the needs that they are seeing of students and families, and that directly impacts how the commission makes recommendations for where dollars go when they come into the door. Small businesses is indeed distinct from the Human Services Fund. And that is a great question around where future dollars will go from the recovery plan. And I don't think that I have an answer for that. I know that our city manager indicated there's still more information to come that will guide our use of those dollars.
Great, thank you very much.
Absolutely.
And one thing I might add in regard to the last question, Human Services staff have had several conversations with economic development staff who are hearing from local businesses about the need for childcare. So we are definitely prioritizing getting funds to childcare scholarships, both in the Bellevue School District and through childcare resources. And we have actually put our economic development staff in touch with several subject matter experts around childcare to see how there might be some other supports that the economic development team might be able to offer businesses via their information on what's needed in terms of childcare.
Oh, that's great. That's a great partnership. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I have three quick questions. Are we collecting general data on who has received rental assistance so that we have an idea of the number of households that have received rental assistance and some general demographics on that?
Mayor, we collect information from our agencies on numbers and demographics, but not identified by named household. So we would not be able to track if one family received that information at multiple agencies to be able to receive unduplicated number counts.
Well, I'm looking more at getting an idea of how many people in our city needed rental assistance and where they were able to receive it from. And then the third question is, I'm trying to figure out how many people are going to have trouble paying rent when the moratorium eviction ends. So obviously those who received rental assistance are not going to have a backlog of rent due, but those who did not will. And so I'm wondering, are we preparing for that kind of need when that moratorium is lifted?
Yes, I think unfortunately and again, I welcome input from Christy or Alex, Ms. Dingler or Ms. O'Reilly. I don't think that we have a 100% clear answer on what families are not getting their needs met. We do receive updates from agencies when they are out of funding and beginning to develop a wait list. And so that gives us some insight. And also just the sheer demand. And hopefully for many families that have received rent assistance, you are correct, that would eliminate their backlog. We do know some families that received rent assistance that only partially paid for their backlog, and they do still have additional back rent, or they have found themselves in a secondary crisis.
So is this, I know when you do the needs update, you send out a questionnaire to people. Is this something that we can include in the questioning?
Yes,
residents?
in fact, Christy or Alex, could one of you answer? I know that is included, but I know you would be able to speak to that better than me, how exactly that's represented in this survey.
Yeah, I can take that. So we are asking questions because we do realize that that is a huge impact. And so we're asking questions around the impact of COVID financially to households. And I believe there's a question around their ability to pay next month's rent. I have to go and confirm that though, that still did remain in our survey.
Well, I just think we should consider getting an idea of who is impacted by this and what the demand will be when the eviction's lifted, so that we can prepare ourselves if you think that would be a good idea.
Yes,
Absolutely.
excellent.
And I also think there's an opportunity through our community conversations. There's a group of nonprofit providers that meet that discuss the financial assistance on the East Side. And so joining that group and seeing the impact and the waiting list the different agencies have, both the agencies we fund and the ones we don't, I think will be really useful.
Great. Okay, well, thank you. Are there any more comments or questions from the council? Not seeing any, I'll thank you for the presentation and the conversation. And we are going to take a 10-minute break. We will reconvene at 7:30. To introduce our next study session item.
Yes, Mayor, thank you. The next study session is on the multifamily tax exemption program, also known as the MFT program. Just by way of background, you received the first serving on this particular topic back in March of this year. With that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Mac Cummins, the Community Development Director, to start the presentation this evening. Mac?
Thank you, City Manager Miyake. Mayor Robinson, members of the council, it's good to be back with you this evening talking about this. This is a pretty exciting topic for us as we look to try to make improvements in our affordable housing program that will help utilization and create more units that are affordable for residents of the community. You all probably recall at your last study session, there were a number of topical items that you took up and gave some direction to the staff on. And we planned on 2 separate study sessions to walk through all of those items. We gave you a whole lot of information in the packet about the last remaining items for your discussion this evening. Although I think before we maybe dive in and do a deep dive on those things, I wanted to talk to the council a little bit about, you've probably all now received correspondence regarding some of the things that came up during oral communications this evening, with some ideas around some new things maybe to potentially put into the program that were not part of the program, particularly around rent stabilization and what that might look like. We have done some analysis of those ideas and think they have real merit and really should be very strongly considered for putting into the program. And so I think, Mayor, I might kick it back to you and just ask, as we go into tonight's presentation, if there's a desire from the council to look deeper into those issues, we can be very nimble and be back with you pretty quickly to talk about some of them. So I think maybe I'll just pause there and see how you'd like to progress.
Thank you. You know, when we started talking about this at our last council meeting, where this was on our agenda, I know all of us got a tremendous amount of feedback from both developers and from affordable housing advocates, giving us kind of conflicting feedback as to which direction we should be heading with all this affordable housing work that we're doing. And a lot of it, you know, although we've seen it in other cities, this is really pretty cutting edge for a city to be adopting all these unique policies to Bellevue. And so we have received a lot of feedback, and I asked that the representatives from the developers, from business, and from affordable housing somehow come together and be able to provide us with a recommendation that they had a consensus on. And I want to thank the chamber, and I want to thank all the parties that were involved for participating in this. The chamber did an excellent job of convening the affordable housing groups. I want to thank Hal Ferris. There's a lot of people who spent a lot of time, including our staff, who worked with these groups to evaluate the recommendation. And so today we received the Housing Development Consortium and from the Bellevue Chamber a recommendation that has 4 different proposals that we consider adopting. And we can take these one at a time. Some of them are similar to what staff had brought forward before, some are modifications, and some are new. And so if council is interested in looking at these recommendations, we can take them one by one, comment on them, and decide whether we want to move this forward and have staff bring it back to us. So can I get a head nod or a shake if this is of interest to you to consider this recommendation that is a consensus between a large body to discuss this tonight? So I'm seeing 2 head nods and I'm nodding my head, but I'm not sure I'm seeing any others. So
I'm ready to have a discussion and make some decisions.
Okay, so that's 1, 2, 3, that's 4 head nods. Janice and Jeremy, are you conflicted on this, or are you just kind of?
Oh, I nodded my head, Mayor, so maybe needed to nod a little bit more.
Okay, thank you. I didn't pick up on it. It's a little hard on Zoom. Okay, that's great. So let's start with number 1, which, if you have this in front of you, it's an alternative to 2-bedroom unit options. So there are 2 recommendations. One is consistent with staff, which is to offer an additional 5% of all MFDE units, totaling 25% of units affordable at 80% AMI. And then the modified recommendation on top of that is B, to maintain the existing 20% of units and keep the AMI at 80% for all MFTE units. So that is what is up for discussion right now. Or are there any comments or questions on that? Go ahead, Councilmember Robertson.
So I think that the staff recommendation was for people, and just to put context, the purpose of this was for developments that didn't have the standard mix of studio 1 and 2-bedroom units. If they're only studio or 1 bedroom, they wouldn't have to then produce 2 bedrooms. But this would allow this to be applicable to other to ones that have a traditional mix but might not have quite 15% 2 bedrooms. So the second thing was to maintain the 20% of units, but drop it from 80 to 70 was the staff's recommendation. And the joint development community and nonprofit community recommended that the AMI for 2 bedrooms stay at 80%, even if it's dropped to 70% for the 1 bedroom and studios. So I just want to make sure I'm understanding it correctly, and I would support that. I think it's fair and appropriate. So I just want to make sure that that's what's on the table.
You know, thank you for the context. I looked at this so much that I like totally forgot the preamble. And so thank you for providing that. You are correct. That is what is on the table. Councilmember Lee.
Thank you. That's where I am too. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? So is there consensus to move this forward and ask staff to bring it back as something that we could possibly vote on, or we will vote on, possibly pass? Okay, so that's number 1. Okay, number 2, I'll try to read the whole thing this time.
Quick question,
Go ahead.
Sorry, just a really quick question. So does bringing it back mean they'll provide some commentary about how this relates to in terms of affordability, for example, relative to their original plan, or is it like bringing it back?
Well, we could, it would be actually bringing it back as the modified plan. So if you have questions about how it relates to the original plan, I think now is a good time to ask.
Okay, I have that question for staff.
I think in order to answer that question for any of these things, or if it's all 4 you'd like us to bring back, we'll do an analysis of how they all weave together and how the overall program can potentially work better, you know, if any or all of them are put into the final MFTE package.
Okay, that sounds good. All right, so the next one we had talked about in our previous meeting. Yes.
Mayor, I'm wondering for anyone that's watching that might not have this information to follow along, whether Mac could pull it up on the screen so that we can all be looking at the same thing, or if that's important. I just realized that this wouldn't be in the packet. So anyway, just for clarity.
Yeah, I think I'm going to look to our staff. Thank you for the comment, council members, on the issues you're now discussing came in the form of a letter that was addressed to the city council. We can see if we can pull that up and then share a screen like a presentation. Just take us a minute.
Does Charmaine have that email? Do we need to forward it to her?
I can search for it if you tell me who the sender was. I can search for it.
Okay, I'm going to forward it to you so you don't.
I could pull it up if you'd like. I have it open.
Thank you.
Okay, I appreciate that recommendation. Then I don't have to feel like I have to read the whole thing verbatim. Okay, so we are on the recommendation 2, which is layered and stacked incentives. In our prior council meeting, we talked about layered incentives, and this adds a stacked incentive. And so the proposal is to increase the AMI for layered incentive units from 50% to 65% AMI. And then they may, developer may either stack the benefit for a total of 28% of the units. That means that you could do MFTE for 20% of your units and use an incentive for an additional 8% of your units. And at the end, you'd have 28 affordable units. That's stacking. Or you can do the layering, which is where you take 20% of your units MFTE and take 8% of those and make those, utilize the incentive program for those for an additional affordability. And you end up with 20% of your units affordable. So I think the recommendation was just to move it to 65% AMI instead of 50% for the layered incentive units. And Mac, do you want to speak to this at all? Or can you, or do you, would you rather wait?
I think just in speaking to this, Mayor, what we would say is thinking about how the two programs, when overlapped, or how the double bonusing should work. We'd be looking at this through the lens, not just of how these two programs work, but also the addition of the rent stabilization concept, which is the next one, on your list, and potentially having a greater public benefit when coupled or combined together than standalone concepts.
Yes. Yeah, I understand that. So let's take this as a whole then, not take them one by one, because they're not standalone. They really are a collection that work together. And then we can decide whether we want to move the whole batch of recommendations forward. Any comments or questions though on number 2? Councilmember Robertson.
Thank you. So yeah, when we talked about the layered or stacked incentives last time, I know that we had 4 council members who wanted to keep it at 80% AMI. The other 4 really didn't say one way or another, all 4. And so it was left at 50% for the purposes of this meeting, but we really never came to a decision on that. From my perspective, I've gone back and watched the meeting, I've read the minutes. So I want to make sure that we're really clear tonight on what percentage the deeper affordability should come back moving forward. I personally would like to see it at 70%. I think that that extra 10% is adequate. It is really, really hard for a fee developer to do affordable housing at the 60% level. I think that 65% is hard. If that's the compromise, that's fine. But I don't think we should try to push it lower, because one of the goals of us amending our MFTE code is to have greater utilization of it. And if people aren't going to use the land use incentive and the MFTE to either give us additional units, whether it goes from 8% to 20% or 8% to 28%, either way, we get more affordable units. It just won't be worth it. And so I really, and as Mac pointed out, the rent stabilization is a very, very big give on behalf of the development community to balance these things. So I think that if we're going to do the rent stabilization, the deeper affordability should not be any lower than 65. I'd be more comfortable with it at 70. And then, but otherwise, if we don't take this recommendation as a whole, I don't think we should cherry pick it. I think it needs to be all or nothing, because some of the trade-offs that were given for some, for some of the deeper affordability, rent stabilization would not be something that the development community would be willing to do at all and use MFTE without the other components to balance it. And so I think that's really important to keep in mind. And I just wanted to lay that on the table. I think that it would be very helpful if council gave clear direction tonight about the deeper affordability level, if we want to see 65, if we want to see 50, if we want to see 70, because that was a point of confusion after the last meeting. And I don't want to leave this meeting with that point of confusion. So thanks.
So yeah, this whole document is a big compromise, and it is a compromise in whole, not in part. So we do need to consider the whole, just a moment, Kimberly. We do need to consider the entire recommendation. But looking at the recommendation and the compromise that was between developers and affordable housing, for them to come up with 65% AMI, that seems like a true compromise between the 50 and the 70. So I'm good with keeping 65% as recommended by the consensus of this group. Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I agree totally. I think our goal is to have affordable housing. So we want to encourage production, and that's my goal. And we work within the ranges, compromises. So I'm sticking with Councilmember Robertson. I would sure like to see higher also, but I think, I can live with what's proposed. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions on this number 2?
I just had a question around so if I remember correctly, and Mac, please clarify if you could, we have programs that take us up to 60% AMI, is that right? And then we have MFTE, that's the next, and there's a gap there. Is that correct? Am I remembering that correctly?
You are, yes, thank you, Councilmember Barksdale. I think another way to articulate that point is previously MFTE was trying to be used both at 80% and for deeper affordability. But as we found other funding programs to help fund some of the deeper affordability, a policy question is, should we be using MFTE more as an 80% or closer to workforce housing, affordable housing program, which is where the council has indicated you'd like to go, generally speaking. And then there's a few of these issues around, how to deal with layering and so forth, because we have multiple programs that do things.
Are you still thinking, Councilmember Barksdale?
Sorry. So my point is, I am interested in sort of how this compares to the existing policy, but I guess I could see it at 60. I just want to my big thing is make sure there's no gap between the programs that we currently have and what is possible maybe through MFTE. So if that answers the Councilmember Robertson's point, I think the 60, but I'm also curious about how it compares to staff's original recommendation in whole.
I think staff's original recommendation was 50% AMI, and the compromise recommendation is, and this is for the incentive program that is, I think, currently available only in downtown and Bell Red. But the recommendation modified that to 65% AMI.
So I would like, I don't know the impact of 5% AMI, but it'd be awesome if it was 60% at the lowest to fill that gap. but curious about the impact.
Okay. Councilmember Zahn.
Yeah, thank you. I think I appreciate the fact that this is a whole package, and I look forward to walking through all of the recommendations of the package. I mean, I would say that it certainly is important that we understand and have a range of tools for affordable housing, because our 1590 funds goes up to 60%. And then we've got MFTE at 80%. And as we look at the layering to have deeper affordability, so if it is possible to get down to 60%, then we wouldn't have that gap. At the same time, I appreciate and understand that the other provisions that are part of this is a package. And I think for me, the biggest thing I want to make sure that we're doing is creating a program where the goal is to actually have this program be used so that we can get affordable housing in the city with some urgency. And I also think that having as many options as possible gives us some more flexibility. So I want to understand all the rest of the provisions. Thanks.
But I hear you say you're okay with the recommendation of the 65%. Is that true or not?
Well, I would say that my preference would be if we could get down to 60, but I appreciate the fact that as we look at a compromise with the other provisions, that 65 might be as low as we can get to with the layering in order to get the rent stabilization. So yes.
Okay. And then Deputy Mayor, where are you at?
Actually, if I could have a question answered by Mac. Mac, isn't it true that at 60 and below is typically tax credit backed? Isn't that correct?
Yes, council member. Generally, there are a couple different kinds of tax credits, but I'll just say in general, a lot of programs use either 30 or 60% as kind of threshold barriers, and then 80% before you get up to what is thought to be market rate above that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm in favor of the if the incentive needs to be strong enough at 70%, I think that'd be great. I could compromise at 65 on this as well. But I think we need to reiterate something that Councilmember Robertson mentioned as well. And I too would like to see, the comparison to the original plan as well. But I think what we need to keep in mind is that there are a lot of compromises in here as well. Quite frankly, the leadership from the mayor to kind of kickstart this program, or this conversation, I should say, just showed, terrific leadership. And then just a number of groups that came together, be it the affordable housing community, the agencies, individuals advocating on affordable housing, developers, the chamber, in particular, Joe Fain, who really rallied a lot of folks together to come up with a really great compromise that really, epitomizes the Bellevue way in so many ways, where we're really able to get to the best possible solution for this community. So I just support this wholeheartedly. And on this one in particular, again, the 65 to 70% is what I would be looking at this. But I really hope my colleagues will just kind of keep that frame of reference, that there are a lot of give and takes here from everyone who's got an incentive, or everyone who has an interest on this affordable housing program, has really weighed in here, and everyone's happy with this. So I just want to make sure we're viewing it through that context as well. Thank you.
Okay, terrific. So I'm going to move on to number 3, which is a new recommendation from this group. It's rent stabilization and cost burden reduction. So Mac, do you want to speak to this, or do you want me to?
Sure, Mayor. I can give a real high flyover just so everybody kind of knows what it is. And then I think we would definitely want to try to explain it in a little more detail and how it fits in with the rest of the MFTE program at the next study session. The idea here is that it is possible that AMIs are going up very, very quickly. And when that happens, landlords can charge the appropriate amount at 80% or whatever the number is, so people's rent can go up fairly dramatically in an affordable unit. So, and we looked back, and that has actually happened a couple of times in the last 7 or 8 years. And so the proposal here would be to cap increases at 3%. Which is a fairly reasonable amount of rental increase to have year over year compared to say 7 or 8%, which is about the most that has occurred in any one year. So the idea would then be to cap that so that we would be able to know that people don't become cost burdened or immediately have a rent problem because of a lot of high income job growth in any one particular year. And then there could be a potential here that's shown as a bank that would then be used in years where there's no inflation or no increase at all to sort of stay near that 3% number. But there's a significant potential protection for affordable renters in the event of a significant AMI increase in any 1 year or year over a couple straight years.
And so this is a tremendous compromise, I think, in the discussion. I have never seen this volunteered by a group of developers before. And I really appreciate, because I think this is a lot of what the community has been crying out for, is to somehow limit our affordable housing rent increases as our city does well. It's just really puts a burden on the renters. And so that is a rental cap for MFTE units to increase maximally at 3% per year. The fourth one, oh, any comments or questions on that? Excuse me. Okay, Councilmember Lee and Councilmember Roberts.
Thank you. I want to add my 2 cents worth. I think this is a great compromise from the developers. The goal we have is we want to have developers build these things so that they can actually live with it, economically. And I think we talk about AMI increase. Absolutely, the renters are going to be the first hit, and so we want to give them some assurance, and for the worst case protection. At the same time, we talk about rent AMI can go up a lot higher, and the same, and it's true. Maybe it won't go higher, and they still get rent increase. But at the same time, the developers, they're putting their money out there, and they want to make sure that in the future the cost doesn't go up much higher than whatever that may be. We've seen costs going up. I don't know when inflation come back, right? And so I think this is a good commitment on the developer side. So we're limited so that we can have some making sure we have some expectations. So I think that everything takes faith, good faith. And I think this is a good faith. And the key is that we want people to feel that they are going into this with good faith and make a lot of homes that are affordable. Because if they don't see we have a program, they're not going to build it. We cannot force them to, right? So we are wasting our time talking about all these wonderful things and never happen. So I think we're coming from the developers. I really feel it's great, wonderful. And they keep the good faith and let them build as many as they want to, because it's possible, and not possible, maybe even profitable, hopefully. Not too much, not greedily possible, but it's socially responsible. So I like the sense of compromise and good faith and mutual trust, and I hope that works for everybody, and for the renters economically, for the developers economically, for the city, for us, for the citizens socially. So
okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Robertson.
Thank you. First, I wanted to thank you, Mayor, for your leadership in getting people together to work out a grand bargain, if you will, on how we can make sure MFTE works really well for the people who need affordable housing, as well as for the people who are fee developers building affordable housing. So I think that that's tremendous. So thank you for your leadership on that. I just wanted to highlight how important this rent stabilization is. It's a huge, as you said, it hasn't been done before in MFT that I'm aware of. It is a huge concession. and on behalf of the development community in order to meet the needs of the people who need affordable housing. So, but this won't work if we change the deeper affordability below the 65% in the prior one. And it won't work if we don't take the parking suggestion in the next topic item. This is a central piece that is the give in order to have more reasonable regulations for the MFTE as a whole. So I just wanted to point that out because this is huge. This is huge. We didn't come up with this. The development community and the affordable housing community came up with this. And this is going to be really beneficial to the people who are living in these units. And really all the risk of if the tenant leaves before the banked capacity is made up, all the risk will be on the property owner. And so this is really a very community-minded thing. And I just want to thank everyone, including Mayor Robinson, for getting this going so that we can consider something like this. So
thank you. Any other comments or questions on this one? It is an equation. At the end of the day, council members, I'm gonna get you in a second. At the end of the day, this has to pencil out. It has to work. We want to create as much affordable housing as possible in our city, but it has to pencil out for the developer. And there's all these different parts of the equation. And so this is a balance of the give and take, as Councilmember Robertson said. Councilmember Zahn.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I just wanted to say that I appreciate the out-of-the-box thinking so that we can get to elements that in total as a package will work, so we can get as much affordable housing with predictable rent increases as possible. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions on this? All right, let's move on to the parking. So the first one pertains to anywhere except downtown Bellevue. And it's talking about renters of MFTE units, and it's decoupling the affordable units from parking requirements. And so if you are in an MFT unit and you choose to have a parking stall, which you may not because you may be right next to light rail or a high frequency transit, and you may be able to go where you need to go without a car. But if you're in a situation where you do want to have a car and you are going to purchase the stall, if you're in an MFT unit, you would get 30% discount on the market rate. And that is something I've never heard of either. So there was a question that I heard, who determines what the market rate is for a parking stall? Mac?
So typically the building owners determine what they want to charge for rent, for the parking stall. And then the concept here would simply be 30%, discount if somebody chose to rent one. I think another important concept is this discount, this would only be given to people that use parking, not all MFTE renters in the building. And it would be on a first come, first served basis. And so the affordable renters in the MFTE units would be on lists trying to get parking if they wanted it, just like other renters. And when their number turned up, they'd have the opportunity to lease a stall. And if they did, then there'd be the discount.
So any comments or questions on part A of two parts? Councilmember Zahn.
Yes, thank you. I was just trying to understand how to put this recommendation in context with what the staff memo actually talks about. So what this recommendation of the 30% discount would be, we would equate that to when the staff's recommending a transportation allowance, that it's somewhat similar to that, but it's not really an allowance so much as if someone in an MFTE unit wants to have parking, then they would be offered the 30% discount. Is that correct?
Yes, council members, that's right. I think the concept here is to think about where are portions of the city right now that are really ready to completely decouple parking. So where do you have access to goods and services and supermarkets and jobs and good transit? And the staff, we've been talking about this particular issue with a whole bunch of the stakeholders for a long time. We firmly believe that downtown is in that position right now. The transitioning areas of the city that are having really expensive parking be built, but yet people that live in those buildings are likely to still need cars. The compromise, if that's the right term, we think is very fair to give some amount of discount in those areas of the city, but completely decouple in downtown for the reasons that I was talking to before. So when we had our memo that went to you, the main objective we were trying to think about is what does it mean to be cost burdened, or how do we define affordability? And I think everybody really is after the same objective here. So how do we make MFTE a program that people will want to participate in? And I think finding a discount for some parking costs here, should someone really need it for some of the reasons I was alluding to earlier, is a pretty good approach, especially when coupled with some of the other things that are up above you've already talked about.
Okay, and that makes sense, because perhaps, as we think about these units, maybe they have programs like Car to Go or other programs where if folks really need a car, they can have access to it. And then the only other question I have in this item is, in your memo, it talked about a transportation allowance. This would be consistent with the planned arch-wide parking approach. So I understand that Arch is part of the Housing Development Consortium. So if we looked at this proposed language, would Arch have to look at changing their parking approach, or what did that sentence actually mean in the memo?
Councilmember Zahn, how about I answer the first question, which I think will lead to explanation of all the process. So Arch is our administering agency. So when we adopt MFTE policies, Arch will implement those. Now, one of the things all the member cities work with Arch on is consistency. So there's an administration part for the Arch staff. If every city has a totally different rule on every single component of something, it can be very unwieldy to administer. However, some of the dynamics in Bellevue, especially around the construction costs of parking and the types of density and development that we are getting, really are very different than some of the other East Side communities. So we've been in contact with the Arch program manager around how we can make some of these kinds of decisions and work with them to have it still be implementable. So should the council choose to go in this direction, this is going to work very well in Bellevue, and then our staff will work with the Arch staff to make sure it gets implemented appropriately.
Great, thank you for that clarification. I don't have any more questions on this.
This is something that I think we got the most pushback from the developers on, was this requisite of providing a parking stall for any MFTE unit. And this seemed to be an impediment to utilizing the program. So this is kind of a compromise that works for the affordable housing and the developer. Any other comments or questions? Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I said, we know to build affordable housing is to keep the costs down, right? That's one. And so we don't want to add costs to the developers. If they do, they are going to build it, okay? So we want to keep the cost down. And it costs money to build parking spaces. And how much the space would cost, market rate or not, whatever. And it depends on the market. Developers are going to charge lots of money when nobody's going to move in there or rent a space. Again, it's and I think that is a good gauge of what the market rate will be. And the question is, what does it cost the renters? Have MFTE renters. And I believe that, Ms. Pearl Leone from Amazon, made a real good recommendation earlier that downtown, there's a lot of already opportunity not to use cars. And there's a lot of, it's possible. And even if they do use cars, I think that's our goal, is to give them options so that they're discouraged to use cars. not to say, well, so given a subsidized parking, well, no fee for parking, that's not discouragement. They say, okay, you don't need a car, you shouldn't have a car, maybe you don't want to have a car, but hey, let's just have a car anyway. That's not right. Or to say, just take an empty space, not use it. That's not right either. And also, it's a choice. In those cases, if they have a choice, then it's a choice they have to make. So I can see downtown, we already decided it's good. But outside downtown, there's other places. Yes, there may be not convenient. They may have to have a car. Absolutely. They may want to use a car. Absolutely. And it's a free choice to use a car. And in that case, it's a choice that they can afford it. It's going to be limited market rate as anybody else want to use a car. And it's only as needs based. Okay, if I need a car, I want it because I have to do it. And if there's no other options, but we're trying to provide other options. That's what the city is aiming at. So how can we be developing options at the same time encouraging them not to use those options? That's oxymoron. So I think we need to give them the choice. And if they do want to make choice, then it's up to them and the developer to see how economically, like Mayor said, it has to make it work. And so if they feel that they need it, absolutely. And the developer, in this case, as the Mayor mentioned, is surprising. They are willing to it's a cost to them. It's something they don't know what happens. In the event they build it, it's costing them money. And it could be empty and they're going to lose money. It could be not and whatever. So they are willing to at least to come, with some subsidy. Well, that's their choice. I mean, it's a private enterprise. If they don't want to, whatever they want to do, you want to subsidize out of their own pocket, or they want to not make as much money. I hope that they are not being too greedy, right? That's the whole principle of this whole thing. Is I mentioned earlier, it's trust, it's social responsibility. At the same time, they can economically, it pencils out that they can do that. So I believe this is an issue that is between the developers and the renters, the MTFE people. And if they are willing to give a discount, I think that's great. I compliment them, pat them on the back. And it's not penalizing, I hope, the renters, because we want to make sure we have other ways and other things, and we provide options. And,
okay, thank you, Councilmember Lee.
That's my position.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions on Part A of this recommendation? Okay, I'm going to move on to Part B, which is this parking study requirement, but I'm going to interject something here. In our last discussions, we talked about, and I think we all agreed, that we should increase the MFTE to all areas that allow multifamily development. But we didn't talk about the high density zones, which I think we currently allow the incentive program in high density zones in Bellevue and downtown Bellevue. And this pertains to B, because I think we should consider increasing the incentive program to all high frequency zones and throughout Bellevue. And so remember, the high frequency zone is, I think, any transit node that has service four times an hour. Is that right, Mac? Am I remembering that correctly?
I think I'm going to look to Emil on the definition there. I think he probably has that at the ready.
Yeah, Mayor, the work that Mike Brennan and DSD had in the parking code did have different definitions for the high frequency network, and for 4 times per hour was one of the definitions.
Okay, so when we talk about parking requirements, it's very different if you're in a high frequency transit area versus not. And you can have MFTE in a high frequency area, and that's where we talk about layering or stacking incentive zoning, the incentives versus the MFTE program. But with it only being allowed in Bel Red and downtown, it kind of limits our discussion here. So Mac and Emil, is it fair to throw out there, can we increase the incentive zoning to all high frequency transit areas in Bellevue?
Yeah, Mayor, I think what we would suggest, if this is an idea the council is interested in, we can loop back with our colleagues in development services, because the code update would likely not be to the MFTE code. It would be built into the high frequency transit zone and the actual land use code and what the land use code requires for parking. So I think everyone's going to be after the same objective, which is how do we get, you know, the right amount of affordable housing as much as possible built, and think about what the requirements of that are. So if there's a desire to build this into the work plan, we've talked to our DS colleagues today, and similar concepts are already in the work plan. And so we would just talk to them about when they plan on bringing the high frequency network back to you all and what the parking requirements could be, and then we could handle it that way.
Is there anybody other than me who's interested in expanding the incentive zoning to all high frequency zones? So I see 1, 2, 3. I see a head nod 4. Anybody else? Conrad or Jeremy's thumbs up. Okay. Okay.
I've never heard of this before. This first time, so I don't have time. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I think we have enough support to bring this back to us and have a discussion. So thank you for that. So now we're looking at the second part of the parking recommendation. Developers must perform a parking study and receive director approval to build below the code requirement of 0.75 spaces per unit in high transit frequency zones. They are proposing that we remove the parking study requirement for projects with MFTE units, so that they can go down to 0.5 stalls per unit. And I guess I would just add to that in high frequency zones, because I think we all have the same concern that we reduce parking requirements in areas where there isn't a lot of transit. And then you see people parking in the neighborhoods, which we don't want to get into that. So I'm hoping that will couple with my idea of expanding high frequency zones. Councilmember Robertson.
Thank you. On the idea of expanding, I raised my hand because I was supportive of increasing the land use incentives in areas with the high frequency transit. And I think looking at the map, that is primarily in our growth corridors anyway. And so we have 2 land use code updates ready to, move forward, which is the East Main and Wilburton. And I absolutely expect, based on conversations I've made, conversations you've had on the dais, conversations the whole council's had on the dais, that we want affordable housing incentives and TOD incentives for those zones. So I would expect those to come forward. If what you're talking about is the work plan is something different than that, I wouldn't want it to leapfrog those 2 things, because those have been waiting for a long time, but maybe it could be added into those as part of, doing them the same.
And let's just stop right there.
Sure.
Can you confirm that, Mac? Is that kind of what you were saying?
Yeah, I would not, it's not going to have an impact on any of the other things. This is already part of our parking code update that you all had a study session on a couple of weeks ago. The question of whether or not to expand or take another look at the map for high transit frequency zones to make sure that aligns with what the council would like to see relative to then being able to take advantage of parking things. We talked to DS, we can certainly get that built into the work plan. That's not a huge thing. And then whatever the right metric is, you'll all need to discuss that in terms of, do you require a parking study or not, or does it just jump down to 0.5 or how that works?
Okay, that's great. And I was looking at the schedule, and we're scheduled to adopt the updated parking, at least on the website, at the end of this month. That might need to push to take into account this, but we're, that interim official control, I think, ends in May. So we need to make sure that we get the parking updated. And I would like to see the parking study requirement that we're talking about incorporated into that land use code so that we don't have to start over on that. But what I was, and I think that's what you're saying, yes? Okay. But what I thought the mayor was talking about was layering, and it was additional incentives for added density of adding affordable housing units, not having to do with parking. Did I misunderstand that, Mayor?
It was a preamble to the parking.
Oh, okay. Because I thought you were asking that we update the.
I was going back to what we'd already discussed with the layering and
okay.
stacking.
So I wasn't. I had my hand was up, but that's why I had some questions. I fully expect that as we do those other plans, we'll be having the incentive for affordable housing for density bonuses. So good. I'm glad that that's not a separate work plan that's going to supplant that other important work. But no, I'm supportive of this. I think it's appropriate. And I think the timing dovetails really nicely with our update to the parking code that has been in process for over a year. So,
so let me just clarify that the new proposal here is to remove the parking study requirement for projects with MFTE units so that they can get down to 0.5 stalls per unit. And I'm adding in high frequent zones.
Oh, okay. So I would like to see the overlap of what that would do for non-high frequency transit zones, or if it was just an across the board parking study waiver. Can we have a map when this comes back? And hopefully we can hear from the nonprofit and development community if they're supportive of it being limited to high frequency zones. Thanks.
Good idea. Councilmember Zahn.
Yeah, so I had similar comments. I just wanted to make sure I was clear about 4B. So worded a different way, what we're saying is that the proposal is if there's an MFTE project, if the units are going to provide less than the 0.5 stalls per unit, that's when the parking study would still be required. So this is removing the parking study only if the number of stalls per unit drops below 0.5. So I want to make sure that that is what is being proposed.
You know, council members given the amount of dialogue we've had about all the heavy duty financial stuff up above, I'd probably want to understand this a little bit better myself. And because it'll be a land use code change that's ultimately getting proposed, I probably want to bring in Mike Brennan and Trisna to have a conversation on that question. And we can certainly do that. We're hearing loud and clear the council would be interested in this kind of concept to try to reduce construction costs, especially around parking when it involves affordable housing. So we'd like to take that over to our land use group and start to see where it's best codified.
Okay, yeah, I support that because in reading this, I just wanted to be really clear about what was actually being proposed. I mean, a parking study is not required if you go above the minimum threshold of spaces per unit as prescribed. So this would only be looking at a waiver for being able to go below without having to do a parking study. So, okay, thank you. I agree that we should put it together with the parking study and the land use work. Thank you.
Yeah, it's lowering the trigger for a parking study as I understand it. So, okay. So it would trigger lower than 0.5 stalls, not as it is now at 0.75 if you wanted to go lower than that. Any other comments or questions on that? That sounds like a robust discussion that we can have on that one. Okay, well, I have one more recommendation that I'd like to run by you all. We have fee in lieu for if people opt out of creating affordable housing. And we've heard a lot from other cities about how, and we've seen it, I think in Bellevue too, that if the fee in lieu is too low, then many developers opt out and just pay into the affordable housing fund and don't actually develop affordable housing. I don't think that's the goal of any of us. I would ask that you consider the concept of having a third party come in and assess our fee in lieu and recommend what's fee in lieu that's commensurate with the financial burden of actually developing affordable housing. So it's a little more balanced. So let me know if that's something you'd be interested in having staff bring back as well. Councilmember Zahn, thank you. Councilmember Barksdale. Councilmember Robertson.
Thanks. No, I'd be interested in that. I also, I've had some folks talk to me about whether there would be options for them to say they're building something downtown, but they also have land out in Crossroads, whether they could transfer their, or transfer to another developer, maybe the obligation to build additional units or build them themselves in a different site. So I don't know if that could be coupled in with an evaluation of the fee in lieu. I'm not talking about having someone build their units in Renton, but in a different part of Bellevue might be.
Like transfer of affordable housing development rights.
Yeah, so yeah, kind of like we have the city hall sells FAR, but instead transfer them to another property, and it would not work if everyone started building all in the same area, but that might be
something to add to the discussion.
Yeah, I think that would be worth it because I'd never heard of someone saying, well, this is concrete and steel here, but we're going to do stick built over there. We could just do the whole project affordable housing if we can, get the density bonus at our downtown. So just something to add to the discussion. I support looking at this. I think it's really appropriate, as long as it doesn't take away from the land use updates that we're still working on for East Main and Wilburton. I'm all for it, assuming we have the budget for it.
It's my understanding that these are actually going to speed up those areas because it will be a blanket thing and it won't have to be spot zoning anymore. So it will apply to broader areas of Bellevue. So hopefully that's true, but you can let us know when you come back. So I'm going to try to summarize what we are asking you to come back with for us to discuss at our next meeting that we cover this. So the alternative to 2-bedroom unit options, I can't remember. I think the only thing that's different is looking at maintaining the existing 20% of units or keeping the AMI at 80% and looking at, the difference between, I'm sorry, I'm confused, but I know what I want to say. I'm just having trouble saying it. Anyway, we talked about 65%, we talked about 70%, and then 60%. So maybe bringing back the impacts of all those options so we can discuss. On number 2, we talked about, or was that number 2 that I just said?
That was number 2.
Okay, sorry, I can't even read
It's
my
okay
notes anymore. Okay, that's number 2. Number 1B is proposing 2-bedroom units remain at 80% AMI. Number 3 is capping MFTE rent increases at 3% per year. Sounds like we have a consensus on that. Number 4 was 2-part discounted parking in anywhere but downtown, so that an MFT unit could purchase a stall at 30% discount of the market rate. And then number 2 was the parking study requirement, changing that so that if you, and I offered that it be in a high frequency zone. If you do MFT units, you automatically can go down to 0.5 stalls. If you want to go lower, you have to do a parking study. And then the 2 that I added, one, oh, sorry, I have to let my husband in. Just a sec. Sorry. Okay. The one that I added was to extend our incentives to all high frequent transit areas in Bellevue. Look at the map and see what the impact of that would be. And then the next one was reassessing the fee in lieu by a third party. And Councilmember Robertson recommendation to see what transferring the affordable housing development to another site could be, what that would look like. And Mr. Miyake, are you raising your hand?
Yes, Mayor. As before we move forward on that, I did want to ask Mac and maybe the staff on the last one. That sounds like quite a bit of work. I would look to you in terms of, from an expectations management perspective, what would actually come back? And, you know, do we have the bandwidth to do that one?
Yeah, thanks, City Manager. I think what I would suggest is there are a number of MFTE provisions that you all definitely want to move forward on. I'm hearing broad consensus for that. Mayor, I think that would be everything that you mentioned right up to the very last parking thing that addresses just land use code things. We'll be in a position to bring that body of work back within a couple of weeks, and happy to talk here in a minute about the public hearing and the next steps in MFTE adoption. What we would suggest on the last issues you raised on things relating to parking or when a parking study is required, we can give you an update pretty quick after talking with our development services folks and figure how that can fit into the ongoing adoption of the new parking code. So that would not come back with MFTE, would move into the land use code work program discussion. And then on the two items that you mentioned, either a transfer of development rights idea that Councilmember Robertson brought up, or how do we look at fee in lieu and is that as effective as it could be? Those could be significant bodies of work. So what I might suggest is let us scope it a little bit, maybe bring it back to the council as part of an affordable housing update, or somehow bring it back to you for thinking about. They're likely to be 8-hour rule discussions amongst the council. And so you'll have to think about the other housing work, you know, that's ongoing and how this could fit into that.
Well, I think nobody wants to slow this down. The majority of the work that you say we can get working on. So I'm comfortable with you taking longer to re-examine the fee in lieu and any transfer of development. Is everybody else okay with that? Okay.
Thank you, Mayor.
All right. Who said that? Oh.
It was me who said that. I just said thank you.
Oh, okay. And I see Councilmember Zahn's hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I just, you know, this is really good work and compromises in all of these pieces. I just want to make sure that I was really clear about item number 1. So the alternative to the 2-bedroom. So what this has is that the first recommendation from staff would remain, which is offering an additional 5% of all MFTE units at 80%. And then it was the second one that would change. And it is maintaining, it is that the 2-bedroom units would remain at 80% AMI, but the other units would be at the 70% AMI. So I just want to clarify that that is the proposed wording, because it was slightly different than your summary that had the 20% at the 80% AMI.
Yeah, I know. I took such bad notes on that. I can't even read what I wrote.
It's believe. Okay. I just wanted to
no,
clarify.
I appreciate the clarification because I believe you're correct on that.
Okay, thank you, Mayor.
Let me just read this again and see. Hold on. Gosh, somebody keeps coming at my door. Okay, hold on. Let me read this. I don't even know. I know it says maintain the existing 20%. The recommendation was from the stakeholders was to maintain the existing 20% of units, but drop the AMI from 80% to 70%. Staff recommendation. No, that was what staff recommended. I'm confused. I think we're going to have somebody else figure this out because I can't even think anymore.
We'll bring it back to you, Mayor. Councilmember Zahn, in short, you're correct. So the idea here is, well, what happens if somebody produces some 2 bedrooms, but not the code required 15%? The proposal is let's keep the 2 bedrooms at 80%, and then the rest, the studios and 1 bedrooms, drop down in AMI as a concession for not producing the family units that are otherwise contemplated.
Great. Thank you. I just wanted to have that in the record so that we were clear about that part. Thank you.
That sounds right. Okay, so Mac, Emil, do you feel like you have clarity on what we can do for our next step?
Yes, Mayor, I think we do. We will take the work you've done tonight and package it with the other decisions you've made, for example, going citywide with all the multifamily zones, and bring you back an overall program so you can see how all the pieces fit together, which is something a number of you asked for early on. And I think based on tonight's discussion, we would be confident that you're probably in a position to vote at the next meeting. So we'll put it all together for you and bring back the analysis you asked for here tonight. And then the next step would be to schedule a public hearing. So we're looking at that as quickly as possible after your discussion. And so we'll work with the clerk's office to schedule another study session.
I think that's great. And you know, if we're not ready to vote, that's okay, but let's make that a goal. And hopefully we will all get the information we need to be able to have a conversation and take a stand on whatever we're going to do with this. So there will be staff briefings available, I know, to everybody as we move forward. So thank you very much for the presentation, and thank you everybody for the conversation. I believe we are done. So with that, I will adjourn the meeting. Thank you. Good night.